Welcome to another episode of Triple Point Training Podcast. This episode is part of the 2025 session of Start and End at Home. This is my Wilderness Risk Management and Trip Planning course. It takes place every February. So it's a Zoom call. You'll hear a few folks chime in to ask Erin questions. The presenter is Erin Phillips, and Erin is a helicopter pilot for the Alaska Air National Guard, the 210th Rescue Squadron. So that means he's flying the helicopter that's bringing in pararescuemen or other folks on search and rescue missions, both within Alaska and on deployments. And I was really excited to bring Erin in and ask him both about how they manage risk within their team when they're planning a mission. And then for me, what's most relevant is what we can pull from that super formal, super professional planning into recreational outings. So that's where we went with the conversation, and let's just jump into it. Okay, I'm psyched to have Erin here, and I'll let Erin introduce himself because he can do a better job of that. I met Erin, it was probably about 13 years ago, at APU, and have been out of the loop a little bit with his trajectory since then. But Erin, just to give you a sense for the crowd, we've got about 50 folks that are pretty engaged this year, which has been awesome. And there's some perspectives coming in from the financial sector and the Coast Guard and guides, and we're having awesome conversations about risk from those different perspectives. And different folks have shared like a risk framework that they use for petroleum engineering and a risk framework they use for financial decisions. And so I'm psyched to hear about what you're doing for flight and for rescue operations. Most folks in here, I think, are really just looking to improve skills for their own outings, recreational outings. And a few folks are coming in with professional perspectives as well, like park ranger or guide. So you can't go wrong. It's a audience that there's going to be a little bit of something for everyone.
Sounds great.
Awesome. So why don't you fill us in on what brought you to the Guard post college, since that's really the last time that we were plugged in.
Yeah, absolutely. So just for a little bit of background, I'm a lifetime Alaskan, and my father was a commercial bush pilot in Alaska. So I grew up in the back of an airplane. When I always knew that I wanted to do something in aviation, I wasn't really sure what that looked like initially when I got out of college. But so I was just kind of finishing up my flying licenses, working on getting my commercial when I learned about the Guard. I had been pretty turned off from military aviation, younger, kind of getting into college and out of college just because I didn't want to leave Alaska and I wanted to stay in Alaska. And that's when I learned about the Guard. And the Guard offers part and full-time opportunities where you can stay in one location for your entire military career. And so when I found out about that and found out that there was a helicopter rescue unit in Alaska, it seemed like basically a perfect fit for me. I'd always wanted to fly helicopters, and just growing up in Alaska, hunting, fishing, and recreating in the outdoors, I'd had friends that had been rescued and friends that had been recovered by the unit. So it just seemed like a really good fit for me, and I was able to put an application in and get picked up. I've been with the unit back from my initial flight training since 2019. So I've been with the unit for approximately 6 years in Alaska. I have about 1,500 hours flying the aircraft that we fly, which is a modified version of a Black Hawk. In the Air Force, we call it the Pave Hawk. And I've been on over approximately 65 missions, and I have been accredited about 74 lives saved in that 6 years that I've been with the unit. The unit's been doing rescue in Alaska since 1991, with over 2,400 missions and over 3,000 lives saved in that kind of 44-year span now.
And had you in high school, were you aware of like the PJs and these like superheroes that jump out of planes and do the rescues, like, or not so much?
I was kind of peripherally aware of it. I didn't know exactly what the mission set was, and I didn't know kind of how they integrated and what they really did. So I knew that there was a military rescue agency in Alaska, but I didn't know much beyond that about the capabilities and kind of the construct of it.
And then does your role involve deployment?
It does, yeah. So being in the Guard, deployments are voluntary,
Hmm.
generally speaking. and we deploy typically every 2 to 3 years for a 4 to 5 month deployment. So our primary mission is combat search and rescue for downed Air Force aviators being in the Air Force. So like behind enemy lines is kind of the idea behind it, personnel recovery. So that is our primary mission that we train to. And then being the most capable rescue asset in Alaska. And Ted Stevens was the who originally wrote the charter for the Guard in Alaska, and he wrote in that we will do civil SAR in Alaska as capable as long as it's not detracting from our federal mission.
And I've always kind of had the impression peripherally that the Guard and the PJs are kind of psyched about the Alaska missions. It's like it is the wilderness experience, and there's nobody else to do the work. And I mean, is that accurate? Is it a prized position?
It is, yeah. I would. We're one of the only units that maintains rescues throughout the year. So most of the other, there's five total, correction, seven total Air Force rescue units across the globe. One in Italy, one in Japan, and then kind of scattered throughout the lower 48 and the one in Alaska. And we're basically the only unit that kind of gets to sharpen those skills on a routine basis. And then, so yeah, and I believe that our civil mission really helps us perform a lot better at our combat mission. It makes us better aviators, in my opinion, and the weather and the risk that we take in Alaska, I think makes us better decision makers for our combat mission. So it is a prize spot to be at. And then small tangent here, but it's something I have in the past struggled with, and a PJ actually put it in a really good perspective for me. I'm excited to hold alert, and I'm generally excited when I get called to go on a mission. I've struggled with that personally sometimes because that means someone's having the worst day of their life potentially. And I had a PJ that put it into perspective for me that people are always going to have bad days. And if you're an expert at your craft and you get the opportunity to be the person that can save them, then you should feel excited about that and having that opportunity.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. And I get it even just at a recreational level. It's like you train and you train and you train, and you want to prove like to yourself, like it was worth it. And I've got this skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to give back. The community in Alaska, the flying community and the recreation community has given me a lot. So to be in this position and be able to give back to that community means a lot to me.
Awesome. Okay, so let's jump into it. And I just want to reinforce for you all, everybody else, like you have equal way here to sway the direction we go and pull tangents. Don't hold back with your own questions and interests. I've got my like this like the stuff we're going to talk about is the stuff that I'm psyched to learn from Erin, but don't let me just dominate it if it's not where you want to go. Sound good? Promise? Cool. So I was thinking, Erin, it'd be helpful. Like part of what we're trying to do is look at how different sectors talk risk and manage risk. And so it would be helpful for us to hear, and I know a bunch of that's not going to be relevant to us, recreationally, but I bet bits and pieces are. And so I kind of like this idea of surveying a bunch of options and then identifying like, oh, that's going to be helpful to me, and that one's not, and going through that. So could you walk us through kind of the formal approach that your team takes for missions and flights?
Yeah, absolutely. So prior to any flight, we give a standard missionized briefing for what we're going to do. That usually encompasses an admin portion at the front where we're covering the weather, any high emphasis training items that we're working towards, where we're going to go, what the timeline is, just kind of setting the stage for everyone that's in the room. And then from there, we move into discussing in relatively high detail kind of every event that we're going to go out and accomplish for that day. Discussing how we're going to do it, where we're going to do it, what additional players we may be utilizing in order to accomplish that. The briefing will be, it's formal, it's being that we're in the military, it will be led by the flight lead. And it's typically anywhere from about 40 to never really more than 60 minutes in length. And we'll do that briefing approximately, usually 3 hours before we go fly.
Okay, so then and you've got like a worksheet that the lead is running everybody through, like a bunch of prompts that you do each time.
Yeah. So, I mean, it'll just depend on what we're going out to do. Typically in Alaska, we train to our civilian mission. So we'll go fly in the mountains, work with the PJs, run them up and down the hoist,
Hmm.
practice different landing in different environments, and then also however we can facilitate their training. So a lot of their training is remaining proficient in their skills. So kind of being rescue and recovery experts in any terrain. Whether they're going, if it's the wintertime, they'll often have skis and they'll want to go, do an overland practice moving from point to point with their skis and their gear. And a lot of times it's also just practicing the effective hoist techniques. So getting people in and out of the aircraft in places where we can't land it eats up a decent amount of our training as well, in a good way.
And so I guess I'm wondering, like, for the prompts or the worksheet, I mean, you're probably assessing, like, how is our team qualification today? What are our resources? What's the dangerous stuff? Like, can you put some words to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So prior to the briefing, we fill out we call it our ORM worksheet. So that's operational risk mitigation.
Hmm.
So essentially, we'll identify everything that has the potential to be a risk to the flight. So it usually starts with, the way it's formatted is it's all the events we're going to go out and do, and we have assigned point values to anything that is a higher risk event. So taking off and landing from a helicopter pad for us is not a high risk event, but going out and doing it where a cloud of snow is going to envelop the helicopter when we land and we won't be able to see the ground is a much higher risk event. So under that construct, essentially, whatever it is we have planned for the day will each event will give us a certain point value. And then we take the weather into consideration. So if it's bad weather, we take points for the weather. When we are launching on an alert mission, we don't have the time to do a flight briefing. So
Hmm.
we'll take points for the fact that we didn't have time to prepare for this, because that is going to elevate our risk if we don't have time to go talk about everything we're going to do. We'll talk about if we're flying at night, we'll talk again about the environmental conditions. How much is the moon going to be up? What percentage illumination are we going to have, which will also kind of add to the risk if it's going to be a very dark night with little illumination. And then we also have a kind of the next two categories. One is the overall task load of the mission. So how many events do we have scheduled and how much time do we have to accomplish them? So we're taking points for those individual events, but then also if we're trying to pack, 3 hours of flight into a 2 hour sortie, that's also going to increase our risk there because we're trying to do a lot. So we're going to have we're going to have high task load. We're going to be moving quickly from event to event with less time to talk about it during the flight. And then the final kind of formal section of it is our crew experience. So if we have young crew members or inexperienced crew members or non-proficient crew members, so people who haven't done these events in a long time or haven't been flying regularly for whatever reason, they were on leave or they were sick and haven't flown for a while, then we'll take additional points for that. Then we have a section for personal ORM. So everyone in the room can assign themselves up to 3 points, 3 additional points of risk. So maybe their kids kept them up all night last night. Maybe they're just getting over being sick, or they have, maybe there's a lot of stress, family stress or work stress in their life right now, and they want to add some additional points in there just to make every other crew member aware, essentially, and to verbalize that, hey, I'm not as well rested as I should be. So I'd like to take an extra point personally for that. And then we have a new section that we've added. It's not a point section anymore. It's I'll talk about that in a minute, actually, because I'll finish up what we have on the worksheet. So once we have all that filled out, we tally up our total points, and that will put us into a low, moderate, or high category. And then we will identify the 3 highest risk things for the flight. So it could be the weather. It might not be related to the activities we're actually doing during the flight or the tasks we're performing. But we'll go and identify what we believe to be the highest 3 or most risky, most dangerous things we're doing. And then we will physically write out on the sheet what steps we're taking to mitigate that risk. And then anytime it's a low, all we have to do is talk about it as a crew. Anytime we bump into the medium category, I have to go talk to another instructor at the unit there, or if you're not an instructor in the unit, you have to go find an instructor and basically say, hey, here's my plan. We are bumped into the moderate risk category today, but here's my plan. Here's how we're mitigating our risk. Do you agree with, kind of the measures I'm taking to mitigate our risk and reduce it to a level that is acceptable. And then anytime we bump into the high category, then we have to go talk to essentially our squadron commander or our squadron DO, so kind of the boss and the co-boss, if you will, at the squadron, and kind of again run them through that same thing, saying, "Hey, we've recognized that we're high risk for this today, and here's the factors that we're going to use to mitigate that risk." That typically only happens getting into that high category on actual rescue missions, where oftentimes it winds up being at night in really dark or really bad weather, is where that risk winds up getting really high in those categories. And that's where me personally, as the aircraft commander, I will always be calling someone else and saying, "Hey, here's my plan. I just want to run this past you and make sure that this is kind of tracks with how would you would handle this, and if there is there anything I'm missing, are there any things factors that I haven't accounted for here in my plan." And then from there, once we're in that given category and we've identified our factors, I have what I've it's a template I've taken from the airline community. Just because something has a high point value does not necessarily mean it's one of the riskier things we're going out to do today. So, for example, as I talked to earlier, if we're doing whiteout landings in the snow, that activity receives 5 points, which is the highest that any individual tally on our sheet will be. So that would indicate that that's going to be one of the riskier things we're going to go do today, or one of the most high risk events. However, if myself and the crew have done 10 or 15 of those in the last 2 days, then we're quite proficient at it, and it may not be one of the high risk things that we're doing today. So that final category is what we've called the calculated versus the assessed risk. So essentially, we have this sheet that doesn't encompass everything. It's a great place to start, and it gets everyone thinking about risk and the things we're going to go do, but it doesn't always exactly match with what the high risk activities we're going to go do are. So it could be that the highest risk activity we're going to do is something that's pretty vanilla, maybe just flying in the low level environment, which we train to all the time. But if we're not proficient at that, then there's a good chance that's actually our highest risk event for today, versus something that may have a larger point total on the sheet, if that makes sense.
Oh, I love that. I love that little extra catch. It's kind of like you have two catches. You're like, let's pay most attention to these three things, and then let's also just make sure yeah, I don't know. It's kind of hard to put that other part into words. Like, what did you call it again? Calculated versus assessed.
I call it,
Yeah,
yeah, calculated risk versus assessed risk. So calculated is the worksheet where
the
we're
points.
right. So we're taking very abstract kind of ideas and assigning a point value to them, just kind of based on, generally speaking, this is a high risk event. But then kind of looking that over and saying, the real risk here for today is actually not these high point total things. It could be the aggregate of all of them. Maybe you're doing multiple events that have high point values, and the real risk is going to be high task load today, which doesn't get a high point value assigned to it because it's something we train to all the time, and having a high task load. So we only take 1 point for that, but it may be kind of the real factor that we need to look at for today and assess what that risk is based on what we're doing for that given day.
Okay, so this is, and Alex, you can re-ask this yourself or clarify what, like, you as an outdoors a rec person yourself, like, have you actually adopted any of this, or what pieces of this would you do for you and your family going for an outing, or would you say this is something rec folks should consider? Like, because we're not going to spend an hour playing that same game. I mean, maybe we
Absolutely.
should, but
No, I don't.
and let me
I
pause.
don't
And
think.
Alex, did I get your question right?
Yeah, I think so, Luke. And maybe especially as well, sorry, I've got kids in the background, but maybe especially as well, if those things that you've learned with your experience in the military, maybe some things that you bring into your recreation life now as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the hour prior is kind of talking through everything. The ORM portion or discussion of the brief is usually kind of just 5 to 10 minutes, where we
Uh,
have the sheet filled out ahead of time, and
mm,
we're just kind of going over it with everyone in the crew, saying, "Hey, here's our big risk factors. Here's our total calculated risk, and here's my assessment
mm.
uh, as the flight lead or the aircraft commander today of what our highest risk factors are." And so I have brought that into my recreation. I haven't assigned point values to things, but prior to going out on a trip, be it a multi-day or even just going for a hike with my family or friends, as simple as one that's right out the back door, I still like to think through what are the possible risk factors for today, and if I were to encounter those things, how would I mitigate that? And so it's just kind of a quick, for me, usually just a quick kind of 5-minute check, and something that I think could help codify it a little bit is something else from our military training that is usually more of a combat mindset when we're talking about an adversary threat that we may encounter while we're flying. We talk about the most likely course of action and the most dangerous course of action. So as an example, if we were, flying against an adversary country, what is the most likely thing that they would do given our presentation? But then again, what would be the most dangerous? And then kind of taking that mindset and relating it to recreation would be, you know, or actually just, I think the cleanest example that comes to my mind right now is we had a tree fall in one of our last windstorms at the house. And I was going out to cut it up with a chainsaw. And so the most likely scenario here that could cause somebody harm is probably, a splinter in somebody's eye, or grabbing the tree and getting a splinter in your hand or something like that. But the most dangerous would be, if I were to hit my leg with the chainsaw or catch a hand or a finger in the chainsaw. And so then kind of thinking, how would I deal with each of those situations? And I think you can take that same construct to recreation pretty easily of, maybe you're going on a pack raft trip. The most likely scenario is maybe you go for a swim, but the most dangerous could be maybe the stream or the river doesn't have a gauge. And so the flows are significantly higher than you expected, which is going to totally change how you're going to have to approach that risk. So I think those two factors, that kind of most likely, most dangerous, could be a really quick way to think through what you're going out to do over that day or the next several days, and kind of try to think through, what's probably going to happen and how am I going to deal with that? And then what's the worst case scenario that could happen and how will I deal with that? Alex, does that kind of get at your question a little bit there? And then is there anything I could do to clean that up?
No, I like that a lot. I've
Okay.
actually used that before. I've been in the Army for like 22 years and we've used that same framework. I just haven't thought to use that. So I like that a lot. Kind of gets into that, Luke, we were talking the other night about the reality testing. Somebody brought that up, that I believe deals with maybe some work in therapy settings. And I like that, is this consequence that I'm focused on useful? If it's a really thing that I need to be worried about. If not, I need to put that to the side, mitigate it, put it to the side, and actually be focused on the real threat, like that strainer or things like that you're just talking about. So I like that.
And that feels super relevant to me. I really like that too. Most likely, most dangerous. Do you think do you think I'm often struggling to figure out like how good are we at trying to make those assessments? Like intuitively, how good are we, just like the average rec folk, couple going out for the weekend at identifying most likely, most dangerous? Like I have an opinion on that, but I'm curious what yours is, Aaron.
I think to pull another term I use all the time, I think it's a very perishable skill. So I think if you're not always practicing it and thinking about risk, then I think it's something that falls off really quickly. And that's why we've codified it in the military with that worksheet, because that worksheet it has everything on it. So it has the things that you're going to forget about. And so off the cuff, if I've been flying a lot recently, I know everything that's on the sheet. I can quickly think through it. But if I've taken time off or coming back from a deployment, kind of getting back in the swing of things in Alaska, it's about remembering all those little things that may occur now that I'm in a different environment. And so I think it's something that you can get very good at. But I think if you're not thinking about it all the time, it's something that quickly will kind of fall off, and your ability to in real time assess that risk will diminish. But I think people who think about it pretty frequently are very good at assessing that kind of on the fly and making realizing what those factors are. And then I think the big thing is just thinking through how you're going to mitigate those factors as well.
I appreciate the reminder that it's perishable and that like everything we do, we're better at it if we like intentionally practice it instead of just sort of thinking it'll come easily. Let me ask Josh this question. He's in a car, so the audio is probably pretty bad. Josh is wondering, in your experience, most frequently underestimated or overlooked risk for that rescue mission. So you've gone through the ORM. Is there something that you just feel is more likely to get lost? And then play that same game for maybe applying that for a civilian needing rescue.
Yeah, so I would think, and this is something that, especially in the military where we all wear different ranks on our shoulder, I think the most overlooked or most underestimated is the what we call crew resource management. So I think it's very easy, being the guy who's sitting in the front as the aircraft commander, if I speak up and say something before I get input from the less experienced members of the crew or the lower ranking members of the crew, then I think groupthink can very, very quickly creep in, and people will be more hesitant to say what they were thinking if I just come out and say, hey, we're going to do this and I think it's a great idea because I've got 1,500 hours in this aircraft and I've done this a bunch. And then the guy who only has 10 hours, who just got out of school, might not be as quick to speak up and say, well, actually, I was thinking about this. Have you considered that? And so I think it's less of a factor as an individual, but when you're working in a team, I think, and this is something I fight for every day in the helicopter, is I ask the least experienced person their opinion on something before I ever give my opinion on it, so that my opinion is not going to influence either their decision to speak up or what they are thinking might be the high risk factor there.
That's cool. Yeah, I like that a lot. And it reminds me of something I think it was Hugh said in a different chat, another guy in the course, a pilot. And he said the least experienced person is going to come up with the most conservative plan. Like they're the one that's not going to want to take a bunch of extra chances because they're like feeling things out. So that fits really well with that. Katie, is that Katie? It's kind of a dark camera. It says Troy. Is that, is it?
Yes.
So this reminds me of what I was asking about you with your clients as far as is this something that you actively do with clients? Could you identify somebody that feels that you can tell is like least comfortable and get their take on it, or am I stretching too far?
No, it's definitely something I could do. And I'm appreciating this conversation because I will often discuss things in the group and we'll often do like eyes closed voting on things to make sure no one's feeling any like peer pressure to do something because everyone else feels okay with it. And we'll always have like veto power for things. But I really like this idea of like feeling out who might be the least comfortable in a situation and then getting their assessment of like what the plan should be, just so like Erin is saying and Luke's saying as well, like that they're not getting influenced by the person with the most experience. I think it's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, that's really cool. Erin, you're dropping some gold gems for us.
Josh, did that get after your question there? Any cleanup on that or any follow-ons? Okay, awesome.
Do you want to turn on audio for your question, or do you want me to do it? You got it.
Erin, so how do you resist or not rush getting through the worksheet when you have to get going?
Like on the alert.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So just to kind of talk through my thought process on an alert. So we hold alert from home or not at work, essentially, which comes from anytime I show up to work, I start what's called my crew duty day. So as a pilot in the Air Force, and this also comes from the airline community, I can only fly for up to 16 hours from the moment that I show up in order to, again, that's kind of an overarching risk mitigation factor, recognizing that longer than that in the cockpit, my decision making is going to be reduced. Everyone's going to be tired. We're going to miss things. So that's why we hold alert from not work. So we have anytime we get alerted, our contract with the state, essentially, or kind of the one we hold ourselves to, is that we'll be wheels up from within 1 hour and 45 minutes from receiving a call. It's typically about 60 minutes, and as low as kind of 30 to 35 minutes is kind of that typical timeline for when I get the phone call to when I drive to work and can get in the helicopter and go. So before I start an alert period, I will take an ORM worksheet home with me. I also have one on my work iPad that I fly with for kind of flight planning and that sort of thing. And so when I get the phone call, and that risk worksheet is the first thing that I pull out, or is the first thing that I take a look at. And I'm kind of initially, I'm not filling it out. I'm just scanning it to remind myself what are all the risk factors. And then once I have that kind of in the back of my head, as I start driving into work, I'm calling the local weather service. I'm thinking about my route of flight, how I'm going to get there. I'm thinking about the fuel planning that I'm going to have to take into consideration. And then I'm calling generally my PJ, the most experienced medical member on my PJ team, and asking them, what is the timeline here? How quickly do we need to go? And are we talking, what is the risk to the individual if we are slow? Because that's going to impact, or that's going to influence how much risk I'm willing to accept. So if someone's going to die if we don't make it there in 2 to 3 hours, then the amount of risk I'm going to take in that scenario is much higher than, hey, they're in a bad situation, we need to get them, but they're going to stay alive for the next 6 to 10 hours maybe. That's where we can, all right, let's slow down a little bit. Like, let's make sure we're not taking any unnecessary risks because we don't have a life hanging in the balance yet, but also let's not move too slow. And so once I've kind of set that framework in my head, that's where I'll pull that sheet back out and kind of very quickly, in 1 minute or less, fill in what I think are going to be the most likely factors and where I think we may stumble. Oftentimes it's that timeline piece where things get missed when we're doing real world missions. And so I wouldn't say I don't rush through the worksheet, but I do move through it in a different fashion when I'm driving into work for a rescue mission versus a training mission. Does that get at the question you were asking there?
Yeah, thank you. Like in the world of medicine, we have the saying, measure twice, cut once.
Absolutely.
So same kind of thing, you can't make a mistake as there's no going back. So you just, over time, have you gotten that feeling of repetition just make you feel more comfortable?
Yeah, and that brings up a really interesting point. Is I think if you look at aviation mishaps over the course of a pilot's career, you are likely to have a mishap early in your career because you don't have very much experience. And then I call it I'm trying to think. I've drawn this out kind of on a graph in the past, and I'm trying to think how I draw it out. I put, I guess just when you have limited experience, you're likely to have a mishap because you don't have that experience. As your experience grows, you're very, very unlikely to have a mishap because now you have more experience, but you don't have much confidence yet in the aircraft. So you're not going to push your limits. So you're probably going to operate below your experience level. And then about midway through a pilot's career, that risk of having a mishap increases quite steeply again. And that's where your confidence begins to exceed your experience level. So now you have a moderate amount of experience, but you have a high level of confidence in the tasks you're doing. So you will oftentimes overfly your experience level. And then then that slowly drops off as you kind of continue to grow in experience. And then at the end of a pilot's career, that risk goes up again due to complacency. So now you have lots of experience, and you probably have enough experience that your confidence has come. I won't say your confidence has come down, but you're not going to overfly your experience anymore because of how much experience you have. But that's where you have to watch out for complacency, because that's where you'll forget, you'll forget steps, or you'll fail to factor things in because you've been doing it so long that now you can be complacent, and you have, in your mind, you have that experience to rely on. So, yeah, so I think that thinking through it in that way, and it also comes back to kind of always going to the least experienced crew member and trying to get their input first. I feel like that naturally checks that experience that I may have, where if I just say something, I might be overlooking something because I'm not thinking of it anymore and I'm getting complacent. Does that?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I love this, the asking the least experience too. I was just thinking how that plays in. Another topic we were having the other day was about how there's often somebody in the group that feels like they're the one that keeps saying no or that keeps expressing like discomfort. And it could be, seems like it'd be really effective to ask that person, like, what's the plan? What do you think we should do? Give them the steering wheel a little bit. So I'm really psyched for that insight. I kind of want to shift into some sort of nuts and bolts about mistakes and some equipment stuff. Let me ask Josh's question, and then we're going to do nuts and bolts. Josh's question: how much emphasis coaching is put on the ORM extra credit about psychosocial and mental health factors? How do you facilitate comfortable communication around this topic with your team?
Yeah, so give me a thumbs up if I'm internalizing this the right way here, Josh. But you're saying those kind of those factors that an individual can add to the sheet and say, hey, I want to take an extra personal point today because I didn't sleep very well last night, that sort of thing. Yeah. So this has to come from, in my opinion, like an institutional level. So, if you're let's take, for example, I think Katie, are you kind of picking up that you're a professional guide through the context here? Yeah. So I think the way we handle this in the Air Force is any crew member at any time can say no and turn it off. So if at any point someone is uncomfortable with what we're doing, then they can speak up and say, hey, like, we need to turn around. We're exceeding our experience level here. We're doing something dangerous. And so that, being okay with that, has to come from the top down. So the leaders, whether that's you taking your family into the backcountry, or that's a professional guide who everyone's looking up to, that it has to be made clear early in the process that there's not going to be retribution for anyone saying, hey, I don't think we should do this. And folks are not going to be ostracized or kind of, put on the outside of the group because they speak up and say something like that. So I think that's where that comes from. And that's where that's how you make that communication comfortable, is no one is ever chastised or made fun of or ostracized from the group when they stand up and say, hey, I don't think we should be doing this today. And when that comes from the top down, and when the leaders and the most experienced people in the room are saying, hey, if you're uncomfortable with this, you need to talk about it, you need to tell me, and we'll either come up with a plan that you are comfortable with, or we'll call it and we'll turn around, or we'll attempt something different, I think is how you build that comfort around that conversation.
That's a great insight. I think I think it's so easy to say anyone can say no, and then I think it's actually quite hard to make that actually be a comfortable experience for the person that wants to say no. That's
Yeah.
helpful. Okay, so I'd like to shift here into some nuts and bolts, and maybe we can do this kind of like a game show or something where you can just kind of rapid fire what comes to mind first. And the reason I'm doing that is I just want to milk you for a bunch of information in the last like 10, 15 minutes. So, sound good?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, common mistakes that people make that get themselves in trouble.
I think the biggest one that we see is not necessarily, it's not any single common mistake, but I think it's being unaware of or unprepared for different conditions than what you expected. If you're in Alaska, like, we know that the weather is a huge factor, and we very frequently see people that are capable and have everything they need, but then the storm that they weren't expecting comes through and completely changes their game plan. What we always say in the military is the enemy gets a vote. So your enemy might be the mountain or the weather, right? And it gets a vote in what happens out there while you're recreating. So I think that's the big thing, is people encounter situations or conditions that they hadn't thought through prior to it. And I think how you think through all those things comes from kind of that, having a process that you utilize before you step into the backcountry to look at it, and knowing that, hey, maybe the weather is forecasted to be great, but then it changes, and thinking through, if it changes, how am I going to deal with that? Do I have a bailout point? Am I going to bring a little extra gear, or am I going to bring a slightly different piece of gear, so that if that most dangerous or worst case scenario were to be encountered, that I will still be prepared for it. And I think that's the big one. And I think that can be I think it changes all the time, of course, just like all these things we're talking about. But I like to think of risk, and I think I actually got this from you, Luke, is risk is exposure multiplied by time, right? So maybe the right answer is, hey, if the weather gets really bad, then we're just going to move really quickly. And so we're not going to bring that extra piece of gear because that's going to slow us down and increase our exposure across this whole event that we're doing. But knowing that if we encounter that most dangerous situation, then we're just going to move really quickly through it. And so I think it can be a very challenging thing to weigh of how do I prepare myself for conditions that were unexpected on the route. But I think that's the biggest mistake I see on the missions I've been on, is that something that recreators were unprepared for occurred, and then they didn't have any sort of game plan in place for what to do. So kind of the contingencies, I guess, is how I would codify that.
One thing I really like about that is that I could tell in your response, you're empathetic because they are prepared for probably best case scenario and even plan B and plan C, but then the weather gets the vote or the terrain gets the vote. I really like that.
Yeah.
Okay, same. The group is out there and they encounter those unexpected conditions. What ends up saving them, either life, injury, or whatever? Yeah, what are the positives?
Yeah, I think for me, this comes back to, just how much preparation do you have ahead of time? And I've heard this a lot of places. I don't feel as though people rise to the occasion. I feel as though people fall back on their training. And so the people that I've seen succeed in these scenarios are the people who have kind of that additional training in the background. So having some medical, having a wilderness med cert or having those types of things, I think are very important. Being able to recognize the signs, especially one we see in Alaska, is hypothermia. So I think it's how can you prepare yourself before ever stepping out the door through additional training and courses that you can take in order to kind of have built that experience for what you're going to fall back on when something unexpected happens. And then just a slight tangent here, when it comes to equipment, I think hands down, the thing that has, saved more people than anything else out there, I think, is an inReach or a satellite communication device. And I can't speak highly enough from a rescue perspective, how that changes things. If I know where someone is and that they are currently alive, or they can help me build the picture out a little bit, that will change, as I kind of discussed earlier, the risk I'm willing to take in order to try and get to somebody. So yeah, if I can just throw a little plug out there, for, not that I'm sponsored by Garmin or anything, but having a satellite communication device, I think, is the most critical thing that recreators can have in their kit to make a difference when something bad happens.
And this is a common question, but sat phone versus two-way, what do you carry?
I carry an inReach. I think any two-way, if you're proficient with it, works. I don't need to necessarily have a conversation with somebody out there, but I do need to know, how bad is the situation, and I need to know exactly where you are. And if I can have that picture painted for me, then that's going to influence what we do when we get there, what we bring with us when in the back of the helicopter, what the PJs are preparing for while we're flying there. Are they preparing for someone who's bleeding out? Are they preparing for someone who's in late stages of hypothermia? And so that all of that helps that person out, because we will be in a place better set up when we get there to assist them.
Since we're talking about equipment, and Jurek asked this earlier to me, the effectiveness of flares for signaling, or if you could just mention signaling in general. So you've got the lat long from the device, but then what?
Yeah, absolutely. So during the daytime, anything that stands out from the background, a lot of people, again, I'll rely on my experience in Alaska. People think like a bright red jacket or orange jacket is great. That really falls apart in the fall in Alaska. There's a lot of reds and yellows out there. I really like bright blue jackets. I think those stand out really well. So if you can if it's something that's coming with you no matter what, and it can be a persistent signaling device, something doesn't have to turn on, it doesn't need batteries. I think that those work really well. Something bright blue is usually really stands out great. So, and then talking through other day signaling devices, flares, something that produces smoke can be a good one. So a bright light, not necessarily during the day, because they're typically, like, a flare is typically pretty fleeting if you're carrying a small flare. So if I'm not looking in the right place when you turn it on, then I'm not going to see it. So something that lasts a little bit longer and produces smoke can be great, because smoke is going to hang around for a little bit, drift in the wind. And even if we're not exactly there, you heard a helicopter, but I was still 3 or 4 minutes away. If you just flash a light, I'm probably not going to see it. But if there's a smoke trail that's drifting, downwind of you, I can always follow that smoke trail back to where you are. And then at night, we fly with night vision goggles. So any light source is going to stand out really well, especially if it's hot. So a Bic lighter is actually an amazing, I can see a Bic lighter from about 2 miles away using night vision goggles. So
Holy cow.
something as simple as that. If we're coming to look for you at night, any sort of warm, like, again, I think a Bic lighter is perfect. But even so much as, and this one is one I like to bring up, when your phone dies, it's out of battery and you don't have a battery charger or whatever, when you hold that, at least on the iPhone, you hold that lock button down and you get that screen that says, hey, plug me in, it's with that red battery screen. That LED backlight that's turning on is also quite visible. So that's another good hip pocket one. If you're all out of batteries and you got nothing else, you can always do that. And again, if it's pointing in the direction of my helicopter, I can see that from about a mile away. So
Seriously.
yeah. So and those are little nuggets I try to pass out to everybody, that at night it's going to be really easy for us to find you. During the day, it'll be a little more challenging because we don't have the addition of our night vision goggles that will help us pick up light sources.
I've heard people talk about motion being more effective than color. Is that?
Yes. I would say motion with color is going to be the best. If you got a blue jacket on a 6-foot stick that you're waving up in the sky, it's going to naturally draw our eyes to it. And then again, kind of anything unnatural, really, the human eye is really drawn to that. So even unnatural shapes, like a lot of times we find people, because their tent, nature does not have diamond shapes or square shapes very often. So those sort of things also stand out quite a bit. But yeah, motion, if you do, if you're blending into the background, do the colors you're wearing or whatever, then motion definitely helps as well.
Okay, next on my list, true or false. If you're not sure how serious it is, I hear people say, make the call because you can always cancel it. And this just feels like I'm thinking my pride's on the line, especially me. I'm like, I teach preparedness in the wilderness. Like, oh, crap.
Yeah, I think up to a point you can. So I would say that a classic answer here is it depends.
Crap.
You can turn it off. I think if you're questioning it, don't necessarily hit that SOS button. Once that SOS button has been hit, your ability to walk it back narrows. So I would say if you are questioning it, that's where I would use a two-way communication device to reach out to someone, that, like we always say, in a 1G environment. So someone who's not experiencing what you're experiencing, we have a lot more brain bites when we're sitting in our home cozy than you may have out there in the wilderness. So I would say if you're questioning it, reach out and try to, get that double check from somebody else and say, hey, is this situation as bad as I'm perceiving it? Or maybe do I have the correct perception of this situation right now? And I should keep pushing. And then, if you are in Alaska, there's a number I'll give to everyone here at some point. I'll put it in the chat right now, for the Rescue Coordination Center. The Alaska Rescue Coordination Center is a military agency. It's who actually tasks me to come out and pick somebody up. But they are experts at determining, their whole job is do I need to activate rescue forces? And so prior to hitting that SOS button, if you can, that's a landline, so you can't inReach that. But if you could always have someone else on the ground, back home, that you could text them, hey, can you call this number? This is the Rescue Coordination Center. I'd like them to be aware of this situation. I'm not requesting rescue yet, but then they can start tracking about it and thinking about it. They may have awareness of things that you don't. They might know that the weather's moving in, and I'd like to emphasize that as well, since we're on this topic. uh, sometimes it's better, if you think you can save yourself for sure, but don't let a situation get worse because you chose not to push the button for a while. What we see a lot is someone gets in a bad situation during the daytime and they don't realize how bad it is until the weather moves in and now it's nighttime as well, which complicates our ability as rescue professionals to come and save you. So I know that's kind of an abstract answer there to a true or false question, but yeah, I would just say don't wait too long, but also, if you don't need to be rescued, then don't hit the button either. So
Oh, that's good. Okay, I want to close this down and respect everybody's time. And I guess what I would like from you, Erin, are like I've gotten a lot out of this, like little gold gems, either a summary or something that hasn't come up as far as like the actionable items. Like what's the stuff we can add to the kit? You've already said two-way communication, like if it's equipment or mindset or, the something that's part of the risk management process. Like what are some action items for this audience, for folks that are psyched to be outside, different levels of responsibility, and just wanting to be the best at it that we can?
yeah, I think I'll clean up my spiel for equipment. I think, yeah, the inReach is critical. And then I would say at a minimum, I think there's a very few medical items that you can take with you that can be critical lifesavers. I think everyone should have a tourniquet in their kit always, and you should know how to utilize it. I think we all have the capability, whatever we're doing, we probably have a knife with us or a multi-tool in the backcountry. And I think that can quickly go wrong. And I've seen tourniquets save many lives. So they're not very heavy. I recommend North American Rescue CAT tourniquets. The combat application tourniquet is the one you should have, and you should train to it. And then on that note, don't train with your real world one because they do wear out. So buy two and use one. Practice putting one on in your home life, but let that be your practice one. So spray paint it bright orange or make a mark on it so that because they do wear out. They wear out because they're lightweight and they're made out of plastic, but they're very effective. So that would be, and then additionally, just anything, I would say something to keep you warm. I think an emergency blanket or something along those lines can be a critical lifesaver, and then something to pack a wound. So those are the big ones, right? The things that are going to kill you quickly in the backcountry are hypothermia and bleeding out, essentially, in my opinion. So you don't have to add much weight to your kit. You can have a very small and tidy med kit that will probably save you from a lot of scenarios until rescue professionals can get there. And then for mindset, as recreators, you guys all know this, but the biggest thing in a life-threatening situation is the will to survive. So you have to have that walking out the door. You have to know that, kind of never give up, I guess is what I would say. Prior to walking out the door, do your best, set yourself up, get the training to kind of be prepared for those most dangerous. Do your best to assess your risk overall. And whether that's, I don't think the right answer for recreation is a worksheet necessarily with point values assigned to it. But I would say, if you carry a notebook in the backcountry or even your phone, when you experience something that you weren't thinking was going to happen, write it down. This happens in flight a lot. If I don't write something down in the flight that I want to talk about later or educate people on later, I often forget it. So I think that's really critical. And then I would just compile those notes throughout as you build experience as a recreator. Every one time you have one of those little nuggets, like, hey, this happened to me today, then that should probably go in a document somewhere where you reread it before you go do that activity again and remind yourself, hey, this happened to us. If it happens again, how are we going to be better prepared for it today?
Dude, that was awesome. You did a really good job. Yeah, that was spot on. Thanks so much, Erin. And I'm really looking forward to dropping the 1G environment phrase in my day-to-day life, like when Sarah gets home.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. We say that one all the time. You lose all your brain bites go out the door when you get into the cockpit. So you gotta think through those things on the ground, 1G, zero airspeed, and kind of go through that, prepare yourself mentally for what might happen out there.
And this Fitch, I'll just share a comment that Rich has on the sidebar here too about like the value of having somebody back home to support with weather decisions and other like a consult. And that's real consistent with what you're saying.
Yeah, and then again, so for folks in Alaska, just to close the loop on that phone number I dropped in there, if you're not in Alaska, you can go look up your local Air Force Rescue Coordination Center. There's one I believe there's two in the lower 48. I think there's one in Florida, and I believe there's one in the DC area that covers Air Force related rescue across the United States. But the way I have my InReach set up is if I hit the SOS button, I have a pre-planned message that goes to my contact. I always have, if I'm going to go recreate, I always have someone who knows where I'm going that's going to have their phone on them while I'm, it doesn't necessarily need to be in their pocket, but is going to see a message quickly. And the message, so when I hit that SOS button, just to build everyone's picture a little bit, that goes to a call center in Texas, and then they distribute it to the rescue agencies that make the most sense. So when I hit that SOS button, a separate message goes to my out of wilderness contact that says, call the Alaska RCC, give them my location and tell them that I've hit the SOS. And then they can shorten these timelines down by reaching out to that call center and saying, hey, we know where this person is. We have the best assets. We're ready to task them right now. We just need you to pass us that SOS information, and so we can get this moving. Yeah, and again, I have the most experience in Alaska, but the Rescue Coordination Center works with the troopers, the Park Service, and all other civilian agencies in Alaska. So if they become aware of something, they will immediately start working with all the players that may come out and save you. So if you're not in Alaska, I would say when you hit that SOS button, maybe it's a trooper phone number or a park, national park phone number for rescue based on your current location. That goes out to someone as well that can call and say, hey, this person is in need of rescue right now, and we need to start coordinating it. Because I've seen, as good as the InReach is, that call center timeline sometimes can extend rescue launch timelines up to an hour or so. So having someone that's going to reach back essentially and get that ball moving on your behalf can make a big difference.
Good. Yeah, I'm glad you took the time to add that. Thank you. Okay, any closing thoughts? Shut her down. Cool. Yeah, many thanks, Erin. That was a really good fit for at least what I was looking for.
Yeah, awesome. I love what I do, and I'm always happy to talk rescue with folks. So I'll actually throw my cell phone number or my email address in here as well. You are all welcome to hit me up. I may be a little slow to respond over the next 4 months. I'm in a advanced instructor course in Las Vegas right now that's eating up a bunch of my time. But if you guys have questions about rescue, how rescue works in Alaska, the different authorities, whether, I think a big question a lot of people ask is this going to cost me money or not? And I can speak to a lot of those questions. If it's me that comes and pick you up, it's a free ride. Uncle Sam pays for that one. So, but I can also talk to the different agencies that are out there. And I think I've seen emails from Luke regarding how to have some rescue insurance. But if you have any questions about anything we talked about today or any of the rescue relationships and kind of how that plays out, Alaska is where my most experience is, but I can speak to it kind of across the lower 48 as well if you're not up in Alaska.
Awesome. Okay, folks. I'll probably see some of you later this week in some of our discussion sessions. And thanks so much, Erin. Just really, it was awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was a great time talking with you guys. So
cool. Okay. Bye, y'all. Erin, I'll give you a call here or a text in a second.
Okay. Sounds good, Luke.